15 of the nation's best doctors surrounded the hospital bed of a billionaire, their faces tight with frustration. Machines beeped, alarms echoed, and still no one could figure out why Richard Hale's body was shutting down. Every second pushed him closer to death, and the medical elite, armed with all their degrees and experience, were powerless. But in the shadows of that same hospital, a boy no one paid attention to was watching. Just 15 years old, the son of a janitor, dismissed by society before he ever had a chance. Yet his mind carried a secret, something the specialists had overlooked. He could see what nobody else could. How could a teenager from the margins of society hold the key to saving a billionaire's life, while the world's top doctors failed? In the heart of Chicago, tucked between the glittering skyline and the neighborhoods where opportunity rarely knocks, stood one of the city's largest hospitals. To most people, it was a place of science, of hope, of healing. But to Alex, it was something else entirely. It was the second home he had never asked for. His mother, Maria, worked long hours as a janitor here. Night after night, she scrubbed floors that would never remember her name, emptied bins that filled up again within hours, and polished the gleaming halls where the powerful walked without a second glance at her. Alex grew up trailing behind her during late shifts, tucked into corners with worn-out library books when no one was looking. Most children his age memorized sports scores or pop songs. Alex memorized medical journals, diagrams of the human body, and case studies that most seasoned doctors would find difficult to parse. The hospital library, dusty and overlooked, became his treasure chest. What others dismissed as dull or too complex, Alex consumed with an intensity that startled even Maria. She knew her boy was gifted, but she also knew society rarely recognized brilliance when it came packaged in brown skin and poverty. Life at school was no easier. Teachers often underestimated him, assuming his quiet nature meant disinterest. Classmates teased him for carrying heavy medical texts instead of comics. Yet Alex pressed on, drawn to knowledge with a hunger that no ridicule could dim. He understood that if he wanted a future beyond the limitations society quietly set for kids like him, he had to build it himself. And so, every evening, after Maria finished her cleaning rounds, he wandered the hospital halls. He watched doctors move with urgency, observed nurses whispering codes he deciphered, and listened to the rhythm of a place where life and death collided daily. In those moments, Alex was invisible, and yet, invisibility gave him freedom. It allowed him to study unnoticed, to see details others overlooked. Over time, he pieced together a mental library of rare symptoms, unusual conditions, and hidden patterns. Knowledge became his shield against a world that doubted him. But there was another layer to his life, one stained by subtle and not-so-subtle reminders of where society believed he belonged. Maria often endured the sting of careless remarks, the way colleagues looked past her as though her worth ended with her uniform. Alex noticed how people avoided his gaze when he carried his mother's mop bucket or walked beside her in the cafeteria. To them, he was simply the janitor's son. Not a student, not a dreamer, certainly not a prodigy. Just another boy fated to be invisible. This invisibility, however, was not a curse for Alex. It became the very thing that sharpened his vision. Because when no one notices you, you learn to see everything. Still, his world was small. The hospital hallways stretched endlessly, but Alex knew they led nowhere for people like him. Doctors carried badges of honor, degrees, titles, respect, that he could only dream of. They seemed untouchable, separated from him by invisible walls built of privilege, money, and connections. And yet, Alex could not help but imagine himself one day crossing that barrier, not for the prestige, but for the chance to do what he loved, to save lives. Fate, however, rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, in moments that seem ordinary until they are not. For Alex, that moment began like any other. Maria had just finished mopping the marble floor near the ICU, the hum of machines echoing faintly through the corridor. Alex sat nearby, leafing through a medical journal so dense that most adults would have set it aside after a few lines. Then the hospital erupted. Alarms blared, doctors rushed, and tension thickened the air. Nurses whispered about a patient too important to lose. Whispers spread quickly. Richard Hale, one of the country's most powerful tech magnates, was being wheeled in. His empire stretched across industries, his fortune making headlines, his influence shaping technology itself. Now his life hung in the balance. Alex felt the shift immediately. The hospital, so familiar in its rhythms, pulsed with an urgency he had never felt before. Specialists were summoned from every department. 15 of the nation's brightest minds gathered, their reputations on the line. Maria urged Alex to stay out of sight, to keep his distance, but curiosity and instinct rooted him in place. He watched from a corner as machines beeped relentlessly, as men and women in pristine coats debated, argued, and scrambled. Hale's condition deteriorated despite their every effort. And yet, something gnawed at Alex. Patterns he recognized, symptoms that didn't align with the doctor's conclusions. A memory flickered. An obscure case study he had once read, buried deep in a medical text most adults wouldn't touch. For the first time in his young life, Alex's vast knowledge collided with reality. Here was a man the world could not afford to lose, surrounded by brilliance, yet slipping closer to death. And here was Alex, the invisible boy, holding a piece of understanding that no one else seemed to grasp. It was a moment charged with tension and possibility, the kind of moment that could shatter INV. The ICU felt like a stage where the highest drama of life and death was unfolding. Richard Hale, once untouchable in his glass towers and boardrooms, now lay helpless as machines pumped rhythm into his failing body. The team of specialists circled him like desperate soldiers, their voices sharp, their commands echoing against sterile walls. They diagnosed, re-diagnosed, prescribed, and revised, yet Hale's condition only worsened. Every tick of the clock seemed to slice away another chance of survival. From the hallway's edge, Alex watched. His heart raced, not from fear alone, but from recognition. The billionaire's symptoms, the tremors, the erratic heart rate, the sudden confusion, did not point to a neurological disease, as the doctors insisted. Alex's mind returned to a medical text he had read, one describing a man who had collapsed under eerily similar circumstances. The cause had not been a mystery illness but something far darker, mercury poisoning. The realization gripped Alex with urgency, but urgency was a dangerous thing for someone in his position. He was a janitor's son. He had no degree, no title, no right to speak in this place where credentials were currency. Yet the truth burned too hot to keep inside. Gathering courage, he slipped closer, tugging at the sleeve of Dr. Langford, the lead physician. His voice shook as he whispered what he had seen, what he knew. But the response was swift and cutting. Langford's face hardened, his tone laced with disdain. "Go back to your mother," he muttered, dismissing Alex as if he were a child babbling nonsense. The sting was immediate. Not only was he ignored, but Maria was pulled into the humiliation. A security guard, summoned with a gesture, told them sternly to step back, his eyes lingering on them with a mixture of annoyance and authority. Alex could feel the weight of prejudice in that gaze, the assumption that they didn't belong, that their presence was an intrusion rather than an observation. Maria tried to shield him, whispering that it was better not to draw attention, better to stay quiet. But inside, Alex's resolve only deepened. Back in the corner, he couldn't look away. Hale's condition was deteriorating by the minute, and Alex knew with chilling certainty that the doctors were racing in the wrong direction. Helplessness pressed on him like a vice. Was he really going to stand there and watch a man die, knowing the answer was within him? Just then, fate gave him an ally. A young resident, Dr. Sarah Lee, noticed the intensity in Alex's eyes. Unlike the others, she didn't dismiss him outright. She asked quietly what he thought, not as a challenge but as genuine curiosity. Hesitant at first, Alex told her what he suspected, recounting the case study, the similarities, the possibility of poisoning. Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't scold. Instead, she frowned, considering the possibility. And for the first time, Alex felt a door crack open. Together, in secret, they began looking for evidence. It was Alex who insisted they check Hale's personal items. He had observed Vanessa, Hale's ex-wife, bringing him toiletries during her visits. An unusual detail that stuck in his memory. In Hale's bathroom kit, Alex's sharp eyes caught it. A tube of toothpaste with a faint metallic sheen when squeezed. His heart pounded. This could be it. He convinced Sarah to send a sample to the lab. When the results came back, they confirmed what Alex had feared. Lethal levels of organic mercury. It was proof so undeniable that even Dr. Langford couldn't wave it away. Shock rippled through the medical team. For hours, they had fought an invisible enemy. But the invisible boy had seen what they had missed. Yet victory did not come without bitterness. Instead of praise, Alex was met with more skepticism. How had a janitor's son known what 15 experts had not? Some muttered about luck, others about coincidence. Langford's pride stung so sharply that he scoffed at the findings, unwilling to admit that a child had outthought him. Even as Hale's condition stabilized under the antidote Alex had suggested, the air around the boy and his mother grew heavy with hostility. Maria bore the brunt of it. She overheard whispers from staff, subtle jabs about how she should keep her boy in line. She felt the sting of judgment in every sideways glance, every dismissive nod. Her pride in her son warred with her fear for him. What if stepping into the light brought not opportunity, but retribution? Still, Alex pressed on. The lab results weren't just about Hale's survival. They were a puzzle piece pointing to a larger truth. Someone had poisoned the billionaire deliberately, and the toothpaste wasn't an accident. It was a weapon placed with intent. The discovery set the hospital buzzing, but it also painted a target on Alex. He was no longer invisible. His knowledge had dragged him into the spotlight, a place that could either validate him or destroy him. And as he pieced together the clues, suspicion grew heavier. Vanessa's visits, her background in chemical engineering, the way she lingered near Hale's belongings, everything pointed in one direction. But Alex knew that revealing the truth wouldn't be enough. He had to survive the disbelief, the prejudice, the pushback from those who would rather protect pride than admit their failure. And in that rising tide of resistance, one question loomed. Would the world finally see him for who he was, or would it tear him down for daring to outshine those it deemed superior? The battle was no longer just for Richard Hale's life. It was for recognition, for dignity, for the right to be believed. And as Hale's monitors beeped steadily for the first time, Alex realized that the hardest fight was only beginning. Visibility forever, or crush him under the weight of disbelief. The hospital's sterile corridors had never felt so heavy. Word of the lab results spread like wildfire, silencing laughter in break rooms, replacing routine with hushed urgency. For hours, the world's finest physicians had flailed in the dark. Yet it was a boy no one respected who had pulled the curtain back. And with that truth came fury, disbelief, and a storm of scrutiny that fell directly on Alex and his mother. Dr. Langford, his pride cracked but not broken, sneered at the evidence. He barked that the lab must have erred, that no child could diagnose what a team of 15 specialists had missed. To admit otherwise would mean admitting failure, and for a man like him, failure was unthinkable. His voice carried authority, and in the silence that followed, others clung to his words. Alex was dismissed yet again, his contribution brushed aside as if his mind had no value. But Richard Hale's body told a different story. The antidote Alex had suggested was working. Color returned to his skin, his breathing steadied, and the monitors, once screaming chaos, began to hum with order. The billionaire who had been seconds from death was clawing his way back to life. That should have been proof enough. Yet for Alex, the victory was bittersweet. He had saved a man's life, but prejudice still whispered that his brilliance was nothing more than an accident. Then came the confrontation that would shatter all illusions. Security footage confirmed what Alex suspected. Vanessa, Hale's ex-wife, had tampered with his toiletries. Grainy video showed her slipping into his private room, her movements calculated, her hands lingering just a moment too long over the tube of toothpaste. It was evidence no one could deny. And when investigators confronted her, the hospital gathered like an audience for a play they never thought they'd see. Vanessa's mask cracked. Her voice, once smooth and calculated, broke into jagged denials. She claimed it was a coincidence, that the footage was misleading, that she was being framed. But the weight of the lab results pressed down like an unyielding truth. Slowly, under the glare of questions and the undeniable evidence in her hands, her resistance faltered. Rage seeped through her words. She admitted she had done it, though not out of remorse but from bitterness. The room gasped. Doctors who had doubted, nurses who had whispered, and administrators who had looked down on Alex. All were forced to confront the truth. It was not their expertise, nor their years of training that had saved Richard Hale. It was the insight of a boy they had ignored, a boy dismissed because of who his mother was, because of the color of his skin, because of assumptions that brilliance could not bloom in unlikely places. Yet even in this moment of vindication, Alex felt the sting of injustice. He saw how some still refused to meet his gaze, how their pride wrestled against the reality before them. They would rather swallow their words than admit they had been wrong. For Alex, this was the harshest lesson of all, that even saving a billionaire's life could not erase the barriers built by prejudice. Still, the tide was turning. Richard Hale, recovering but lucid, demanded to know who had saved him. When the answer pointed to Alex, silence swept the room. The billionaire's eyes locked on the boy, and for the first time, someone with power truly saw him. Not as a janitor's son, not as an inconvenience, but as the mind that had given him back his life. Maria wept quietly in the corner, torn between pride and disbelief. For years, she had scrubbed these floors unseen, her son trailing behind her in the shadows. Now those same shadows had birthed a light so blinding it forced the world to look. But even as Hale's gratitude filled the air, Vanessa's bitter words echoed louder. Dragged away by officers, she spat her final venom. "I never even knew he existed." The cruelty of her remark seared the room. It wasn't just an attack on Hale or on Alex, but on every overlooked child, every unseen talent, every hidden genius buried under society's indifference. Her words hung there, heavy, unforgettable. And in that silence, Alex realized this was no longer just about a billionaire's survival. It was about visibility, about proving that brilliance cannot be boxed in by status, skin, or circumstance. The climax of his journey was not the saving of Richard Hale's life. It was the world finally forced to reckon with a truth it had long ignored. The invisible boy had become undeniable. And yet, standing in the center of that storm, Alex felt the question pressing in. Now that he had been seen, would the world allow him to rise, or would it push him back into the shadows? In the days that followed, the hospital felt transformed. News of the incident spread beyond its walls, carried by whispers and headlines alike. A billionaire had been saved from a near-fatal poisoning, but the true story wasn't in the crime. It was in who had stopped it. For the first time, Alex's name was spoken not as the janitor's boy, but as the mind that outwitted some of the most celebrated doctors in the country. Richard Hale recovered slowly but steadily, his empire intact thanks to the courage and insight of a 15-year-old. When he emerged from the haze of near-death, he wanted answers. And when he learned the full truth, he did something few expected. He stood before the staff, before cameras, and declared Alex the hero who had saved his life. The boy society had overlooked was suddenly placed on a stage where the world had no choice but to see him. Recognition came swiftly, But it was more than praise. Hale funded a $50 million initiative dedicated to supporting hidden prodigies, children whose talents thrived in silence because no one believed in them. Maria, who had spent her life cleaning the halls of the hospital, was asked to coordinate the program. Her days of invisibility ended not with applause, but with dignity restored. For the first time, she could stand tall, knowing her son's brilliance had pulled them both out of the shadows. Alex himself was offered something even more extraordinary: a scholarship to Stanford, a consultant role at the hospital, and a seat at a table that once seemed unreachable. But beneath the celebration lay an uncomfortable truth. It had taken saving a billionaire's life for society to acknowledge his talent. It raised a haunting question. How many other Alexes were still unseen, their gifts buried under stereotypes, poverty, and the quiet cruelty of racism? Even as his life changed, Alex carried the scars of what he had endured. He remembered the sting of being dismissed, the humiliation of being told to go back to his mother, the way prejudice nearly cost a man his life. Those wounds could not be erased by scholarships or funding. They remained a reminder of how deep injustice runs, how easily voices are silenced when they come from the wrong place, the wrong skin, the wrong class. Vanessa's sentencing brought closure to the crime, but also a chilling final note. Her last words in court, "I never even knew he existed," were replayed again and again in media coverage. What she intended as venom became something larger, a mirror reflecting society's blindness to those it deems unimportant. Alex became a symbol not just of youthful genius, but of the countless lives ignored because of bias. For Maria, the transformation was deeply personal. She no longer pushed a mop through endless corridors unnoticed. She walked with her head high, her son's triumph stitched into her every step. She had always known he was special, and now the world had no choice but to admit it, too. But perhaps the greatest impact lay not in the titles, the money, or the recognition, but in the shift Alex sparked. His journey forced people to question the systems they trusted, the assumptions they made, and the talent they overlooked. Doctors who once mocked him were left humbled. Viewers across the world, hearing his story, began to ask, how many brilliant minds are dismissed before they can ever shine? How much potential is wasted because of prejudice? The story of Richard Hale's survival became more than a headline. It became a testament to the truth that genius knows no boundaries of age, of race, of status. Alex had turned invisibility into strength, seeing what no one else could, and in doing so, he exposed not only a crime but a society too blind to its own injustice. And so the tale ends where it began, in a hospital, where life and death hang in balance, and where the smallest voice proved stronger than the loudest authority. Alex was no longer invisible, but his story carries a question that lingers far beyond his own victory. How many more prodigies remain hidden in the shadows, waiting to be seen? And what will it take for us to finally recognize them before it's too late? What do you think about Alex's journey? A boy ignored, dismissed, and nearly silenced. Yet he saved a billionaire's life when the world's best failed. Do you believe society is still overlooking hidden talent like his? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to light.